Hi, I'm Dr. Christine Ince, host of Baransu Balance podcast. Racism is a topic that often causes discomfort in most Americans, but today we will dive into the subject. My guest today is Dr. Evan Willis. He attended private Christian schools most of his life. Most people would say he was privileged, yet he has a passion for social justice, urban education, and ministry. I asked him why should someone like him care. He said because of our experiences. His story started early when at age 6 it was suggested he was a special needs child. Stay tuned for a discussion about racism in conservative Christian schools with Pastor Dr. Evan Willis.
Baransu Balance podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Hello. Welcome, Dr. Pastor Evan Willis, to another episode of the Baransu Balance podcast. This program emphasizes the importance of the mind, body, and soul. And today we are going to talk about the mind and the soul. I wanted to start off with asking me to tell me a little bit about yourself and your path to receiving your doctorate and the title of your thesis.
As you said, thank you, Warren, for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure. I would say that a little bit about myself. I'm a pastor in the South Atlantic Conference. I pastor the Northeast Seventh-day Adventist Church located in Charlotte, North Carolina, nestled in the Hidden Valley community. And I have been pastoring for 13 years since I got hired in 2011, so 12 years. Mary, and then married to my wife, Aaliyah. We met at Oakwood, and then we have 4 sons.
You met her in college?
Yes, we met her in college at Oakwood University.
Okay.
Freshman orientation, we met.
Okay.
We're in the same group.
And you have 4 wonderful sons.
Yes, 4 sons.
So you are the perfect person to interview about how to achieve balance in your life.
Balance, insanity in the process too.
Oh.
And I got my doctorate from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and with a degree in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in urban education. It's one of the top urban education programs in the country. My advisor was Dr. Dr. Chance Wayne Lewis, and was from Egypt to Canaan, interpretive phenomenological analysis of messages Black males received as they attended conservative Christian schools.
Okay. Just one moment. Okay, and we're back. You were saying, Dr. Willis?
I was just giving my dissertation title, which was From Egypt to Canaan, an interpretive phenomenological analysis of the racial messages Black males received as they attended conservative Christian schools.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I'd like to start off with a quote from an article I just found by a Dr. Cynthia Hudley. She's a professor emeritus in Department of Education at UCLA, and Dr. David Wakefield. So the conclusion of their review article is stated, overall, this review supported the conclusion that a strong positive ethnic identity benefits adolescent mental health and academic success. So that was their conclusion after reviewing all of the literature out there.
Yeah.
So Dr. Willis,
Mhm.
tell me about, in your research, about the racial messaging while attending a predominantly white conservative Christian school from personal experience and your research. You can just give anecdotes or.
So, I mean, I think ultimately, when my dissertation committee interviewed me, one of the questions they kind of asked was, when did you garner interest in this topic? And I think from a very young age, I was fascinated with the concept of race. And they say typically race is around 4. I think probably around 2 or 3, I had an understanding of a difference between black and white. Now, 2 or 3, how do you know that? I mean, I don't know how I know that, but I can remember when my parents told me when I was like 3 and younger that I was convinced that my father, and my brothers were white, my mom and my grandmother black. So I had this concept of white, black. Now, I may not have been all the way right, but had this awareness that white and black. And I think they said when I was 3, too, they told me they're taking us to Blockbuster, which is no longer in existence, except for I think one place in Washington State is one Blockbuster left. And I thought my dad said,
that's all right. It's the conversation between the generations, but I believe that ties us together.
Yeah. I think my dad told me that I started crying because I thought we were going to Blackbusters and they were going to bust us up. So, so, so I was always keenly aware. So I remember, when I was from 3 to 5, I went to our church's preschool, Todd Haven. And then after I graduated, I went to a predominantly white Christian school because
so the preschool was at a predominantly black Christian school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went to part of my Black Adventist church. And interestingly enough, my parents never sent us to the white Adventist school in the city. They chose to send us to another school. There must have been some issues that pre-existed. Well, no, there definitely were some issues in the city that pre-existing me.
I think parents tend to protect their children,
right,
and not discuss everything.
Right. And so then I went into a predominantly white Christian school, and I immediately, just being in a new environment at 6 years old, was able to distinguish and distill this school is different than where I came from. I felt as if, so in my preschool, you didn't disrespect the staff or the grandmothers because one, they had wooden spoons, so you definitely didn't say anything disrespectful. And I never forget, the first day of school, a student said something kind of flippant to a teacher, and I was looking like, yo. First, I was like, you're gonna take that, and then secondly, I was like, you can get away with that.
So there's a difference in styles of respect.
Yes.
At that school.
And so immediately I just started noticing these differences between the white Christian school and the black Christian school.
So I listened to one of your outstanding sermons, and I heard you give a testimony that you were considered handicapped. Is that what I heard? At age 6, as soon as you entered that school?
Yeah. So they let me in there.
Dr. Evan Willis, is that correct?
Yeah. They let me in on probation because my brothers were already there, and my brothers were homeschooled. I was the one who wasn't homeschooled. My brothers were doing well, and I think we have a dentist who's paying the tuition. It's like we're not going to mess up the good money, so they let me on probation. But I remember taking a test when I first went to school. I took it as me and this other kid, and I apparently I performed like abysmal, and so they told my mother that they thought I was special needs.
Can I say something, Dr. Evan Willis?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So my daughter, who will remain nameless, who is currently an engineer and majored in math. So she's taken 5 semesters of calculus.
Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
she was also denied access to a Montessori school at age 4 or
Yeah.
5 based
Yeah.
on an entrance exam.
Right.
Our form of teaching is different, at least in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't push all of that. I mean,
Yeah.
at least in my family,
Yeah.
reading at age 3. But go
Yeah.
on.
And I think too, even beyond just literacy and things of that nature, research has demonstrated historically that standardized tests are normed for middle class white students. And typically, maybe it may not be that the kid's not understanding, doesn't have understanding of the content. It may be that the way the question is phrased is unfamiliar to the students, so they're trying to really they're confused by the question. So, for instance, there's a study done in California, and they had an urban Black school and a predominantly white, and suburban predominantly white school. And the teachers who collaborated, they taught same content, and they gave same tests over the content. And the urban school outperformed the suburban white school, right? But then when the state test came out, going over the same content, the Black kids performed much worse on the exam than the white students did. So we know historically these tests, and even in their design, were supported by the eugenics movement, were designed with the intention of proving Black intellectual inferiority. There is value in these assessments, but these tests oftentimes say, and I can't remember the scholar who says it, oftentimes ask, do you know what I know? Not what is it that you know?
So the test, again, this is anecdotal from my personal experience with the unidentified daughter.
Yeah.
So I remember reviewing, at that age, there's just a lot of story questions in their exams. Right. So, my children did not grow up in an urban environment.
Right.
And so I remember there was a question that there's a couple questions. One had something to do with the theater.
Right.
My children had never been to the theater.
Exactly.
And then another question had to do with a picture of a basketball court, I believe, and a swimming pool. And they asked which one was attached to the school.
Right.
And in my memory, which may not be 100% accurate, my unidentified daughter picked the swimming pool,
right,
which was not correct. It may have been correct in her school, but not, not in the average school.
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my experience going immediately into that. And I guess the doctorate became so interesting enough. I never really thought about a doctorate until I never thought about it. Then I kind of just realized my professors in college were doctors, but a lot of them were doctorates in ministry as opposed to philosophical doctorates, PhDs. And I remember I did an assignment, and I can make a confession. One of my children and I are very similar. I do stuff to get it done. I don't always give my best effort with some assignments, especially like the everyday things, right? And so people could assume based upon certain things that they can assume a lot based on how some assignments may look when handed in initially. But a professor pulled me aside, Dr. Russell C., who was a mentor to me, who's now deceased. And he asked me, had I ever considered getting a PhD? And that was the first time I was probably a senior. I was a senior at Oakwood. I never thought about it. And he said, well, I really think you should consider it on what you wrote, which was really like, I just think I got it done. I wasn't really like putting a lot of thought into it. You demonstrate some deep thinking, some ability to connect ideas, stuff like that. But he wanted to get a PhD in religion. And this may sound strange for a pastor, but abstract thought around religion is not of intense interest to me.
Okay.
Yeah. For me personally, I think a lot of questions will be answered in time. And a lot of us really don't know the answers. So I don't ponder around things that are just, okay, it's maybe it's true. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So you're more into practical application of religion and not just so much the theory part.
Right. And whenever I had to read some of the assignments that they gave, I would just be like having brain fog because like I don't even know what they're talking about. But part of that is because they're speaking from 1700, 1800 perspective. I think my interest in religion kind of grew with Dr. C in the building because he brought it down to everyday life. And so if I had had him from freshman year to then, I might have really considered a PhD in religion. But I think also I began to ask the question, is there any earthly value to what I'm doing? And in a society now that is becoming increasingly unreligious, my PhD allows me to enter circles that a PhD in religion, while valuable, may not allow me to enter into some circles and some conversations and meet some people.
Okay. So you interviewed some young men and they were, looking back on their lives, and what struck you or in their stories, or you could relate a story that stands out in your mind comparing the two different types of institutions?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, it was not their job to do. So I did comparative analysis. Their job was just tell me their story.
Right.
Now, sometimes they would compare. And so I should say this. My dissertation is really a second study. My first study led me to say, what's the difference? So I was interviewing people in my first study for, which just looked at the racialized experiences of Black males in Christian schools, in predominantly white Christian schools. And I found that Black males who had been in Christian schools from like kindergarten all the way through were less able to distill. They knew something was off, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what was off, right? But then when I dealt with Black males who had gone between two worlds of predominantly white versus Black-led Christian schools, they were better able to distill and distinguish and compare it to what seemed more natural for them, which led me to say, well, I want to look at Black males who've gone between both predominantly white conservative Christian schools. But then the key here was I wanted to look at Black males who went to Black-led Christian schools, because the difference is you can be in a predominantly Black school, you have a lot of predominantly Black Catholic schools, but they're under white administration. And there are urban private schools that are still under white administration. So I've noticed that under Black leadership, there is a different ethos in the environment. It's a different feel, a different approach. So I wanted to look at the difference between predominantly white, which is definitely under white leadership. And leadership is not just having a principal, but a board and a staff and a support system. Versus something that is in a Black homogeneous space. And so as I began to look, what I began to hear from these Black males about these white Christian schools is, one, there was an indifference about their academic achievement, which had an implicit message, because most of the messaging around race is not explicit, because we live in a society that encourages colorblind realities due to people not want to deal with lawsuits. So it's what is implied, not what is overtly stated. You can't penalize someone for something that's implied. You can penalize someone for something that's overt. Mm-hmm. And so what a lot of these Black males shared were the implicit message I garnered from these Black males in white Christian schools was the expectation of academic underperformance, expectation for social deviance, expectation for sexual immorality and immorality in general, and delinquency.
So you're saying that these same boys who basically were the same young men felt like they were being treated differently at the two different institutions.
Yes. So, for instance, at two different institutions, but even interracially within the predominant institution. So, for instance, there are times when a white kid would do something, the Black kid would do the same thing at the same time. The white kid would receive a lesser penalty, and the Black child would receive a harsher penalty. And that was pretty consistent. Or the Black kid would do nothing, but the assumption is that the Black kid can't be believed, and the white kid's story is accepted without question.
So when your kids are going to school, how do you counteract in a predominant white environment? How do you counteract this? Do you tell your kids to be colorblind? That, I mean, how do you counteract this negative messaging?
Race is a reality. So, my third son got in trouble at school. I didn't even get in trouble, but the PE coach called me. Who knows I'm a pastor? And
I'm sorry, you said your third child goes to where?
He goes to a charter school here.
Oh, okay.
And he got in trouble. He didn't get in trouble, but the PE coach called me to tell me something he had done. And he was in line, and a little white girl who he doesn't quite like too much came and got in the line. And he said, "This is a Black line." So all the Black kids were in the line.
He said that?
He said that all the Black kids were in the line. And what he was really saying, and kids sometimes they don't say things fully. He was saying it's really all Black line till you join. But she went and told the teacher, principal. He called me, and I was like, he's like, "Pastor, I know you don't support that." I'm like, I mean, maybe I do, maybe I don't, but okay. So we have conversations around race. I mean, it's a reality, right? I mean, every day you had, especially during those times, you had the killings of Black people that's seen on social media. You have it happening on the news. People are talking about it. And so it's impossible to escape the reality. So you have to talk with your children about it, but talk to them about it from a healthy perspective. Healthy perspective meaning not infusing it with racially charged language, but infusing the conversation with an awareness of the racial reality. And so and also reinforcing positive racial messaging.
So I have another question. So many of us have, come from privileged backgrounds. Parents are pastors or engineers. Is it just the color of our skin makes us a little bit more empathetic? I mean, I don't get it.
I think it's our experience, right? So I think there's, which I think is an unhealthy racial approach, which is Black only. But it's not just Black people who do that. Latinx people do it. Indigenous populations do it, and
When
sometimes
you
we
say
have
Black only, what do you mean?
like, for instance, at times there are things that happen to other marginalized groups in society, and sometimes Black actors say, "I'm concerned about my community
Oh,
only,"
okay.
and so the issue with that is the great evil that we're being confronted with is white supremacy. But beyond white supremacy, it's also it's also the evil of those who are exploiting a capitalistic system. So I understand race is a creation designed to divide so that groups don't come together as the real evil going on in society. Meaning, um, you had the Bacon Rebellion in Virginia in the early 60s. I can't remember the exact dates. So don't get me to start lying. But in essence, what happened is poor blacks, well, no, enslaved blacks and Irish who were indentured servants recognized their shared oppression, joined hands, and connected with Bacon's rebellion and rebelled. The response from the ruling class in America at the time, in the colonies at the time, was okay, we'll create a perpetuity of servitude of slavemanship for blacks, but we will infuse white people with the ability, one, to be free to indentured servitude. We'll also, was already the case, but we'll make it easier for them to not be slaves. We'll give them certain benefits, and we will empower them with the identity and the reality of being white. Now, they may not have been as strategic thinking the whole big picture out all the way through, like I'm saying it, but at the same time, they legislated certain rules that made sure that white people, people from England, people who are Irish from Europe, from Eastern Europe, would receive a certain level of treatment that blacks would not be received. And what happened is those whites, and today, out of whiteness, they assume they have a better benefit. And so they are less concerned about the issues, not realizing that they themselves are being exploited.
So, if or when people of color become the majority in the United States, what's to prevent us from going down that same pathway?
So,
It seems to me absolute power corrupts absolutely.
oh yeah. So race is just our current iteration of power dynamics in the world. Race is just one of the many. I think the reality is that race is a 400 plus year experiment.
In the United States.
In the United States, and this side, but it's global, right? It's global. Eventually, race could dissipate as a fact. Eventually, it could. But if you notice, a lot of what's going on in America today is an attempt from the conservative right and 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 conservative right to maintain power. So right now, today, in public schools, white people are no longer the majority, right? So they move below the 50% line. They're at like 40-some%. That's the first time in American history that's happened.
Especially in Texas, but it
Right.
seems like that we're still being divided, and that history is being altered in some
Yes.
places.
Yeah, they're trying to retell history. They're trying to depoliticize history. Make it nice and clean. But even with legislation around abortion and walking back certain policies like affirmative action, there's an attempt to maintain the semblance of power that exists. And there are those who like to believe that the issue is when older white conservatives die, then we'll be in a better place. The reality is Charlottesville, Virginia was filled with millennials. And over the last 5 years,
Who? I'm sorry, what did you say?
The race riot in Charlotte, Virginia was led by a lot of white millennials.
I see.
And so the issue is still present. People are trying to maintain power and control.
So you are realistic with your 4 sons.
Yeah.
And I know you're a Christian pastor, and embrace the tenets of love your enemies and do good to those who harm you.
Right.
Golden rule.
Right.
And there's that verse that says, heap coals of fire on your enemy. I never quite understood that one because it sounds bad. You're putting coals of fire on someone.
Right.
So what are your goals, mental, physical, spiritual, for your sons, your nephew? And I'd like to end with your story of your, was it a basketball trip that you had with them?
Yeah.
To a camp?
Yeah. My goal for my children is that they love the Lord their God with all their heart, all their mind, all their soul, that they live out the fullness of their potential, their God-given potential, that they are strong supporters of the church, that they are engaged in local congregations. I think my long-term goal is that we all engage in business together. Because I think we're stronger working collaboratively together than apart. I mean, in one way or another, because the reality I see for them in their future is it's going to be increasingly difficult in this country. And they're going to need help, and they're going to need to know how to work and do things of that nature. So I figure if I can pass some things down while I'm living, if we can do business together, that'll be big. But I think above all else, I want them to be engaged in God's ministry, whether that's professionally or as lay members.
There was one story or statement from your paper that stood out with me. It's a young man who basically said that he didn't feel love in the white conservative Christian school.
Yeah.
And that's one message that I'd like to leave with our white brothers and sisters. We all have conceived ideas about groups of people based on what we're taught, but if you can look at that child, see your child, and love that child, and have high expectations for that child, that would be my message.
Yeah.
And
And I think that that is of tremendous value. And I think what we see happening in Black-led Christian schools is we see a infrastructure of support and a raising of expectations. I think the danger in these contemporary times for many Black, well-educated parents is that they can believe the lie that because the building looks good on the outside, it's good for my child, and miss out on what is happening in these school environments that don't have everything but have love.
Right.
Right. Because there are programs, there are institutions, there's money, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your child's going to flourish there. In North Carolina, we have school report cards, not report cards that come home about your student, but report cards about how the local school is achieving. And oftentimes parents choose certain schools or try to get the kids in certain schools because it has an A grade. And while it's an A grade based upon test scores, it doesn't mean it's an A for your child. And so you have to choose what's best for your child. And I think we would do far better. Some people may call me a hypocrite for this, but we would do far better if we supported our institutions more instead of kicking them because they don't have everything the other institutions do have.
Yeah. Yes. So I thank you, Pastor Dr. Willis. And could we end with a word of prayer?
Sure.
This is spiritual aspect.
Let's pray. The kind of most gracious Heavenly Father God, we thank you for opportunity to have conversation. Thank you for the blessing you've given us and the work that you've done. God, I ask that you would continue to bless this podcast, bless Dr. Ince. I ask that you would bless the hearers. We ask that you would allow whatever message was sent out to be understood positively and not be clickbait for some. We thank you for everything you've done, continue to do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Bye. It was interesting to note that Dr. Evan Willis, when he took a broad look back on history, he gave the opinion that the concept of race has been used to amass power and that there were victims of just about every race. I pray that as we tell our stories, healing will ensue and that our children will reach their God-given potential as Dr. Willis prayed for his children. I'm going to quote Tina Turner again, who said, "What's love got to do with it? Everything, period." This is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a balanced, healthy mind, body, and soul. Please subscribe, comment, like, and share. Thank you.